After losing both parents in a tragic accident, a boy asks to stay with his uncle, but the man coldly replies, "Does my home look like a shelter to you?" Stephen was an introspective boy, with reserved gestures and a constantly attentive gaze. His shyness was striking, but it didn't come from insecurity. Sometimes it sounded like maturity beyond his years. He observed more than he spoke, and when he spoke, he did so carefully. He was naturally kind, discreet in movements and words. He lived with his parents in a simple, small house, but full of affection. Despite limited resources, there was stability. His father worked as a delivery driver, always leaving early and returning late, but never failing to be present. His mother was a pharmacy clerk who kept the household running with lightness and care. The home was balanced, even if modest. Nights ended with laughter, short stories, or just the comfortable silence of those who understood each other. Weekends followed an honest routine. Homemade food, small chores, some time together. Stephen never had many friends, but he didn't feel lonely. What little he had was enough. His world was small, but whole. But what seemed whole shattered irreversibly. Stephen's world, so small and solid, collapsed silently one night when he didn't wake up alone. The tragedy happened without warning, without time, without chance. An out-of-control truck, a sharp curve on the road, a dry impact. His parents were returning from a visit to a distant cousin's house. There was no rescue, no hospital. The collision was instant, and neither survived. Stephen knew nothing that night. He was sleeping under the care of the neighbor, as many times before. He woke up to loud knocks on the door and the sound of unfamiliar voices. When he opened his eyes, the hallway light flooded the room. Everything was too quiet. The neighbor called him softly, but there was something in her tone that didn't match the usual. "There's a lady wanting to talk to you, Stephen," she said, trying not to let her voice tremble. In the hallway, a woman with a firm posture and serious expression watched him with dark eyes that didn't look away. Stephen looked at her suspiciously, his body curled inward. He said nothing, just waited. The woman took a step forward, slowly crouched down to his level, and spoke carefully. "My name is Melissa. I'm a social worker," she said, with a firm but kind voice. "You know where your parents went yesterday, don't you?" "To my mom's cousin's house," Stephen replied softly, frowning. "Did they come back already?" Melissa took a deep breath before continuing. "There was an accident, Stephen. A truck. It hit their car." He frowned even more and shook his head. "But they're okay, right? They're just hurt." Melissa hesitated for a second. Her eyes stayed fixed on his. "No, they didn't survive the accident," she said, her throat visibly tightening. "I'm so sorry, Stephen." The neighbor started crying softly, covering her face with her hands. Stephen looked at her, then at Melissa, then at the floor. He remained silent for a few seconds. "But they said they'd be back before lunch," he said, as if still searching for some logic. "My dad always comes back." "Stephen," Melissa said gently, "they're not coming back." He took a step backward, looked down the empty hallway behind the woman, then looked at his own feet. "No, that's not true," he said, his voice now faltering. "They're just hurt. You're wrong. They're going to come get me." Melissa slowly shook her head. "I wish that were true, but it's not." His eyes began to fill, but he blinked quickly, trying to hold it back. His breathing became irregular, as if he didn't know how to react. "But I was waiting," he whispered. Melissa stepped closer, but without touching him. "I know, and I'm sorry you're hearing this like this now," she said. "But you're not alone, Stephen. I'm going to take care of you, okay?" "I want to go home," he said softly. "I just want to sleep in my own bed." The neighbor sobbed, turning her face away so she wouldn't break down in front of him. Melissa kept her tone calm. You'll be able to get your things, you'll have a safe place to stay. But, for now, we have to take it one step at a time." He didn't answer anymore. He just sat slowly on the floor, leaning his back against the wall. He stared at his hands, as if suddenly not knowing what to do with them. Tears fell silently as his eyes remained empty, fixed on nothing. Melissa didn't try to console him with promises. She just stayed there beside him, accompanying the silence, respecting the time of a boy who still didn't fully understand the magnitude of the absence that had swallowed him. Hours later, with the bureaucracy underway, Melissa began the search for relatives. The priority was to find a family member who could take Stephen in. The first name that came up was Matthew, the mother's older brother. "Do you know this man?" Melissa asked the neighbor. "They haven't spoken in years," the woman said. "I don't even know if he'll want to." "Still, I have to try," Melissa said. "It's protocol, and it's the right thing to do." There was something about the name Matthew that bothered her from the moment it appeared in the records. Stephen's mother's brother, the last close relative identified. A widower living alone in a large house, according to the neighbor. Distant from the family for years. She knew how these stories usually ended, but refused to make decisions based on predictions. She decided to go there personally and take Stephen with her. The ride was silent. Stephen sat in the passenger seat with his forehead against the window, eyes lost in the passing streets. He carried only a small backpack with clothes folded hastily and an old notebook with drawings. Melissa respected his silence. She knew every word at that moment could be a burden. When they arrived, the house before them looked imposing and sad. A tall gate, an unkempt garden, closed windows. It was the kind of place where time passed slowly. Melissa pressed the doorbell and waited. Behind the gate, a shadow appeared, and seconds later a man emerged, frowning at the sight of the two. "Matthew?" Melissa asked. "That's me," he said, his voice dry. "I'm Melissa, a social worker. This is Stephen, your nephew," she said firmly. "We need to talk." Matthew looked at Stephen strangely, as if he didn't recognize him. His eyes moved back and forth between the two. Then he opened the gate without saying anything. Let them enter. The living room was spacious, but cold. Few furnishings, no pictures, the air heavy. Matthew gestured vaguely for them to sit, but he himself remained standing. "What happened?" he asked directly. "Stephen's parents died last night in an accident," Melissa said calmly. "They were coming back from a visit when a truck collided with their car." Matthew didn't answer immediately. The information seemed to hit and bounce around. But there was no emotion, just a long sigh. "And why did you come here?" "Because you're the only close relative we could locate," Melissa said. "Stephen needs a place to stay, someone from the family." Matthew looked at the boy. Stephen lowered his gaze, clenching his hands between his legs, trying to look strong, but his body trembled slightly. The presence of the man before him was strange. He didn't remember the face. There was no memory of that uncle. "This isn't a place for children," Matthew said, not looking away. "I've raised my son. I'm not starting over now." "He has no one," Melissa said. "He's alone. You're the last link to his mother." "My house is not a shelter," he said, "and I'm not a babysitter, neither emotionally prepared nor financially." "He lost everything, Mr. Matthew," Melissa said firmly, "and he's hearing every word you say." Matthew looked away, ran a hand through his hair, uncomfortable, but his voice remained firm. "I can't take this on. I don't want to. Let the state take care of him. It's your job, not mine." Stephen looked up at that moment. His face showed no anger, no surprise. It was as if he had already expected it. Still, his voice came out thin, low. "Are you my mother's brother?" Matthew hesitated, took a deep breath. "I am," he said, not facing the boy. "And did she like you?" Matthew pressed his lips. Didn't answer. Melissa stood up. She looked pale. "Let's go, Stephen." The boy stood slowly, without hurry, as if even that hurt. When they passed through the door, Matthew did not follow, nor said anything. He stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed, staring into space. On leaving, Melissa lightly touched Stephen's shoulder. The gesture was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was the only one she allowed herself. "You don't deserve this," she said softly. Stephen said nothing, just looked back one last time, saw the house door close hard, and walked silently beside her. The next morning, Stephen was taken to a public shelter. The neighbor said goodbye with a kiss on the cheek and a folded blanket. He didn't react. The shelter was functional, impersonal, cramped. There were rules, schedules, chores, divisions. Melissa accompanied him to the entrance. "I'll keep close, Stephen," she said. "You won't be alone. I know it's not ideal, but it's temporary. We'll find a way." He just entered without saying anything. The first days were tough. The rooms were shared, meals followed fixed times, and activities were collective. Stephen, who came from a quiet and affectionate home, felt the weight of change in every detail. There were no more laughs before bed, no smell of coffee from the kitchen, no space to be at peace. He avoided the other boys, preferred corners, watched everything but didn't get involved, spoke little, carefully. Didn't cause trouble, but also didn't seek closeness. It was as if he was trying to disappear inside the structure. Melissa made frequent visits, talked with the staff, checked reports, tried to understand how he was adapting. "He's quiet, but polite," said one caregiver. "No trouble, but doesn't interact. Seems absent." Melissa looked out the window. Stephen was in the yard, sitting alone, staring at a fixed spot on the ground. "He's grieving," she said. "But it's not just that. There's something deeper inside him. It's like he's shut down inside." Weeks passed, and the shelter's routine imposed itself. But not all boys were easy. One, Mark, quickly stood out. A few years older, aggressive, impulsive, liked to impose respect through fear. From the start, Mark picked on Stephen. "Are you mute?" Mark said one afternoon. "Or just think you're better than us?" Stephen didn't answer. "Playing the victim," Mark said, stepping closer. "Nobody here has parents. Grow up." Stephen moved away, not out of fear, but contempt. That irritated Mark. In the following days, the bullying became routine. Pushes in the hallway, mean comments, quiet thefts of personal items. Stephen didn't react. Melissa noticed subtle marks on his arms, his withdrawn posture, the ever-alert gaze. "Is someone bothering you?" she asked during a conversation. Stephen shook his head no, but Melissa didn't believe him. One stuffy afternoon, while everyone was in the yard, Mark made another provocation. He grabbed Stephen's notebook and threw it on the ground. "Pick it up, Prince," he said. Stephen went to the notebook, bent down, and as he got up, Mark shoved him hard against the wall. The sound of the impact caught attention. A trickle of blood ran from his eyebrow. The fight was contained by a monitor. Mark was separated. Stephen was taken to the infirmary. The incident was recorded as a fight, one more among many. Melissa learned the same day. She went to the shelter, looked Stephen in the eyes and said, "You don't have to endure this silently," but he just lowered his head. There was no anger on his face, no fear, just emptiness. And that emptiness, more than anything, worried Melissa. Because it wasn't something that healed with time. It was something that needed someone who wouldn't give up, even when he had already given up. While Stephen struggled to survive in that dry, harsh environment, someone far away began to realize the weight of his own silence. Ronald, Matthew's son, lived alone in a small apartment, worked as an IT technician, spending days between service calls, repairs, and clients who hardly ever looked him in the eye. The relationship with his father was practical, occasional calls to ask about the electric bill or discuss some forgotten paperwork. There was never closeness. And about his mother, Ronald remembered little. She had died when he was still a teenager. Her presence lingered more in old objects than in vivid memories. Still, thinking of her, he felt a kind of distant tenderness. It was during one of those rare conversations with his father that something sounded strange. "I had a visit from social services," Matthew said almost indifferently. "That woman showed up here with a boy." Ronald was on the other end of the line, trying to fix a computer. He stopped. "What boy?" "I think his name was Stephen, your aunt's son, the youngest one. Seems she died in an accident. She came asking me to take the boy." Ronald took a long time to respond. "And what did you say?" "What I had to say. That I'm not a shelter. I've had my life. I raised you." The silence on the other end was longer than Matthew expected. "And where is he now?" Ronald asked quietly. "In a shelter. I don't know. Not my problem." Ronald hung up and stared at the phone for a few seconds, as if expecting it to ring again, but the room was silent. The talk with his father had been cold, like all the others, but something about that topic left him restless in a way he couldn't explain. The vague image of a boy being rejected, sent to a shelter like a burden, began lodging in his mind like a stone in his shoe. Annoying, persistent. He tried to continue the day as usual. Sat in front of the computer, opened 2 devices to fix, answered late emails, but focus didn't come. Every time he lowered his head to inspect a board or write a note, he saw his father's face saying indifferently, "I'm not a shelter. I've done my part." And then the echo of his own question. And where is he now? In the following days, he tried to convince himself it wasn't his problem. After all, he never had any relationship with that part of the family. Barely knew Matthew's sister. He remembered her vaguely, like someone who appeared in old conversations that always ended with a sigh or some cutting phrase like, "She chose to distance herself." He never asked why, and his father never explained. But the image of the boy, alone in a shelter, rejected as if he were a weight, didn't leave his head. No matter how much he tried to rationalize, something bothered him. And each passing day, that feeling shifted from discomfort to guilt. Not guilt for something he had done, but for something he was failing to do. It was on a quiet night that, without much thought, Ronald got out of bed and started rummaging through a drawer in the bookcase. At the bottom, he found an old box with loose papers, yellowed receipts and old photos. Sifting through them, he found one that froze him for a few seconds. His mother, smiling as he remembered her in few memories. Next to her, cut in half, was what looked like Matthew's shoulder, his arm extended over her. It was one of those pictures taken without much pretension, but there was something in the softness of her smile that struck him unexpectedly. He sat with the photo in his hands and stared for long minutes, tried to remember her voice, her laugh, some striking phrase. But everything came jumbled. Still, the memory was good, gentle, and it was that gentleness that prevented him from ignoring what his father had done. He still carried in his eyes the little affection left from that family. So something inside him felt responsible too. Ronald spent the next days trying to convince himself he was exaggerating, that it wasn't his role to solve his father's unfinished business. But the discomfort grew. He started sleeping badly, eating little. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined the boy alone, in a cold place, hearing from a stranger that no one in the family wanted him, and even though he didn't know him, he could no longer accept that idea passively. It wasn't a sudden decision. It was slow, laborious, made of short thoughts that came back several times a day. But when he finally felt he couldn't ignore it anymore, he sat in front of the computer and started searching. He looked for social service records, made calls, faced impatient attendants, rejections, and then insisted. explained his name, who he was, and why he was looking for Stephen. And so, days after that seemingly unimportant call, Ronald found himself before a woman with a firm voice named Melissa, saying, "Do you really want to know, or is it just curiosity?" He answered without hesitation, "I want to know, and not just that. I want to see." Melissa pondered for a moment, then replied, "We have a scheduled technical visit to the shelter tomorrow. You can come if you're willing to listen more than speak." Ronald showed up the next day. Simple shirt, backpack on his back, direct gaze. He was greeted by Melissa at the shelter entrance. "Don't make promises," she said before entering, "and don't try to compensate for what you didn't live." He's heard many words that led nowhere. Ronald nodded. They entered together. The place was stuffy, narrow hallways, mixed noises. They found Stephen in the yard, drawing with a short pencil on a torn sheet. When Melissa called him, he looked up. "Stephen, this is Ronald, your Uncle Matthew's son." The boy looked at Ronald suspiciously, said nothing, but he didn't back away either. Ronald crouched down, getting to his level. "Hi," he said. I'm your cousin. I know it doesn't seem like it, but I am." Stephen just looked. "I didn't bring anything. No present. No answers," Ronald said. "I just came to meet you, and if you don't want to talk, that's okay." Stephen stayed silent, but didn't look away. They stayed like that for a few seconds, and it was Ronald who first stood up. "Can I stay here a little while?" he asked. The boy shrugged. Ronald sat on the ground on the opposite side of the paper and just stayed there. The following week, he came back, the next too, and so for weeks. Ronald's visits became routine, always discreet, always silent. Slowly, Stephen began to look at him with less suspicion. There were no direct questions, but there was a constant presence. Ronald noticed how he avoided touch, how he kept distance, even to take something from the caregiver's hands. Noticed the marks on his arms, the way he slept facing the wall, as if always expecting to wake up somewhere else. "He expects nothing from anyone," Melissa said in one of their talks. "And maybe that's why he deserves everything." That night, Ronald went to his father's house. Matthew opened the door with an irritated expression. "You here?" "I came to tell you that you were wrong," Ronald said directly. "Refusing Stephen wasn't caution, it was cowardice." Matthew closed the door without inviting him in. They stayed in the hallway. "I don't have the health for this anymore," he said. "What I lived through is enough. I've done my part." "I'm not asking you to do anything now," Ronald said. "I'm just saying you missed the chance to do the right thing." Matthew sighed, ran a hand over his face. "Are you going to take care of him?" he asked, with a thinly veiled, ironic tone. "Yes," Ronald replied, "because someone has to." He returned to the shelter with the decision made, talked with Melissa, started the procedures. The temporary custody process began. It required interviews, home visits, psychological evaluations, reports, inspections. Melissa accompanied every step. "He's going to test you," she said. "He'll distrust. He'll protect himself. Don't give up." After months facing bureaucracy, interviews and reports, the authorization finally came through. Ronald showed up at the shelter with a new backpack. "Ready to go?" he asked. Stephen nodded, didn't smile, didn't cry, just got up and grabbed his old backpack. They walked together to the car. The trip to the new home was silent, like everything between them. Ronald's apartment was small, 2 rooms, a worn sofa, a desk with computer parts, a divided closet. "You can have this room," Ronald said. "It's not big, but it's yours." Stephen looked around, dropped his backpack on the floor and sat on the bed. In the first days at the new home, Stephen kept the same silence from the shelter, entered and exited rooms like someone avoiding leaving footprints, slept with the door ajar, face turned to the wall, accepted food on his plate, ate slowly, and always got up before finishing everything. Ronald, noticing this, began making smaller portions, as if silently saying, "You don't have to finish everything, just try." He never forced conversation, sometimes asked short questions about school, the notebook, what he wanted for dinner, and accepted answers that came as nods or one-word replies. There were days when the silence seemed solid between them, occupying the space like a third resident. But Ronald didn't back off, nor pressured. He just was there, making coffee, washing dishes, fixing some device, as if constantly saying, "You may not talk to me now, but I'm still here." "Want rice or noodles today?" he asked, whenever preparing something simple. "Rice," Stephen sometimes answered. Other times just pointed with a finger, with a half smile that quickly disappeared. It took weeks for the two to watch something together. Ronald put on a movie in the living room and left the remote on the couch. Stephen appeared during the movie and stood silently for a while. Then he sat on the edge of the couch, legs pulled in, saying nothing. When the movie ended, he got up and went to his room. The following week, he arrived before the movie started. Conversations came slowly, spaced out. First about practical things, school grades, teachers, the cold nights. Then observations came, a comment about the movie, a question about a tool on Ronald's desk, a doubt about a dish they were eating. They weren't long talks, but there was an attempt, a thread being pulled carefully. Ronald noticed everything but didn't celebrate prematurely. He knew every small word was a victory, but also a fragile surrender. Stephen was a boy used to losing, and those who lose a lot fear what they gain. Over time, Ronald began including the boy in small tasks, asking for help assembling a shelf, installing a program, choosing a movie, going to the market together. Never as an obligation, always as an invitation. And Stephen, little by little, started to accept. Melissa continued to follow closely. The technical visits became less formal over time, and the reports pointed to something everyone had already noticed. Stephen was adjusting. He still had setbacks. There were still nights he woke up sweating, breathing fast, as if fleeing some nightmare. But now, when he went back to sleep, he knew someone was in the other room. The years that followed were simple, but solid. Stephen grew up disciplined, with a discreet attitude and sharp intelligence. He went to therapy for years, initially encouraged by Melissa and later by his own will. He understood his fears, learned to name what he felt. He finished school with merit and a calmness that surprised his teachers. He was the kind of young man who listened more than he spoke, who observed before acting. He didn't seek the spotlight, but never hid either. He had a natural sense of justice that didn't come from lessons, but from absence. He knew what it was like to live without anyone fighting for you, and perhaps for that reason, he was always the first to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. Matthew never looked for the boy, but months after the custody was official, a box arrived with no sender. Inside were old photos of the sister, Stephen's mother, at different life stages, laughing with a dog in her arms, a teenager on a bicycle, dressed for some kind of presentation, and along with it, a note written in shaky handwriting. She deserved more. The boy, too. Nothing else. Today, Stephen and Ronald still live in the same apartment. The walls remain simple, the furniture worn, but the life they share is peaceful. They share bills, chores, and sometimes silence, that same silence that was once a barrier and now is comfort. They don't call each other father and son. It was never necessary, but they look at each other as if they were, and that is enough. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.